October 3rd, it's in a select board meeting for Barrington. Are the cameras on?
We're live. Yep.
We're live. Roll call attendance.
Gibson here.
Capiello here.
Bailey here.
Nanshek here. Mr. Scotia is absent for today. Could I ask you all to rise and put in pledge allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Agenda review. Our proposals. Mr. Bailey.
Thank you very much. As we know, last week, the police chief made a comment that he was missing 2 pieces of paper for public safety buildings expansion and renovations. And I was just wondering if that has to be on the agenda for tonight, or does the TA have, going to be able to give it to us later on?
They'll be presenting that with their budget presentation on October 17th. And all of those materials will be a part of their budget packet, or the packet for that meeting.
We'll have a chance to review them.
Yes, sir.
Not just on the weekend before.
Absolutely.
Okay, because I think, what is it, three scheduled that day for the police?
Just the police.
Yeah.
Is scheduled for that
Okay,
day.
all right. Then I withdraw that.
I had 2 edits to the minutes, so I would request we take that off the consent agenda.
And there was suggestion for one other addition to the consent agenda.
I had one proposed addition. I sent an email today from the fire chief. He's interested in pursuing a grant for fire equipment. And so he has matching funds available. Would like to pursue that grant. So I propose adding that to the consent agenda as letter I.
I have no objection.
Anyone have this? All right, very fine, so we'll remove minutes.
Add that at the bottom of new business.
That would be A.
We can add those. You guys vote, yeah. Anything else? A motion to approve the agenda as amended?
Second.
I'll make a motion.
Oh, I thought,
If you can second.
I second, I thought you were
Right.
making.
No, I-
That can be the way.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Public comment. Excuse me. 3 minutes. Anyone first here? And then, please.
Thank you.
And then, they'll address the people here and then we'll take the virtual.
William Watson, Bowman Drive, Barrington.
Thank you.
Thank you. As residents of Barrington working for a Barrington-based business, we are concerned about the disparity in rulings levied on our Class 6 road improvement requirements, i.e. full approval for 100% waiver on a 9 to 10 foot wide road with 10+ homes and no turnaround for public safety vehicles versus no approval on a partial waiver for a 16 to 31 foot road with multiple turnaround opportunities and with only 3 homes. Why would the same criteria not apply? Should it not be proportionate? Suffice it to say, recent rulings expose the need to assess the practicability of the 10% levy, as this blanket tariff, is irrefutably unfair and inequitable, and it is indeed creating a great burden to some in our community. We believe without reservation that the need for improved access for public safety vehicles on many roads in Barrington is a necessity that must be addressed. Please note too that we support some form of resolution that nullifies this concern. However, many of our industry colleagues share in our frustration with the current policy, but moreover in the disproportionate application of its enforcement. We believe that the 10% of total construction cost is extreme, unfair, and unnecessary burden on Barrington residents who would otherwise apply these funds to further improve their quality of life, their property value, and that of their abutters, thus increasing tax revenues for the town. We know that this policy has created a challenging burden for the planning and select board, and we do not envy the position it places on each member in deciding how best to appropriately employ it. Nonetheless, we believe that it would be prudent to address the disproportionate execution of the policy and do so by adopting changes, thus accomplishing a resolution that is reasonable and equitable for all parties affected. We believe, as do most, if not all in our industry, of our industry colleagues, that it would be judicious to form a committee inclusive of a planning board member with industry knowledge and experience, a select board member, appropriate affected department heads, and private sector industry professionals with direct experience and knowledge of the Class 6 road policy to address the aforementioned concerns. A few of our industry partners and competitors have offered to volunteer for such a committee in a supportive role. We believe that there must be middle ground that is fair and equitable, and one that the select board can reasonably enforce with confidence and justice. We believe that this is a good first step, and we respectfully request your consideration. In closing, we recognize that voicing our concerns about policy challenges and disputes is less demanding of one's endeavor for the resolve than to propose solutions. And while we humbly submit to the select board our thoughts on theoretically achievable deliberations, we acknowledge that there are protocols and practicalities governing our public safety entities to which we have neither experience nor authority to amend doctrine. The following, even if dismissed as impractical, are predicated on the acceptance of those limitations and moreover, our determination to best serve the public safety challenges of our fellow residents in our vibrant town of Barrington. Before we can determine the best strategy, the conclusion must first be established. The consequence, as we understand it, is the lack of or poor accessibility to homes on Class 6 roads by public safety vehicles. To determine which roads are inadequately conditioned for public safety vehicle access, a comprehensive assessment of the road conditions should be administered. There must be a basis with which to make decisions on how to best proceed with the necessary upgrades and unending maintenance requirements legislated and enforced by our elected officials. The responsibility for establishing whether a road is adequate for access by emergency vehicles can only be made by the affected department leaders. Conversely, how we achieve the necessary upgrades should remain with those charged with making those decisions. Rather than a percentage of total construction costs, which has failed to provide the intended relief, there could be a flat fee for all building permit applications to fund a Class 6 road improvement fund that would assist with the necessary public safety improvements. If the road improvements are not achievable, the funds could be utilized for financing the purchase of vehicles that can safely navigate these challenging roads. This equitable flat fee could be collected with any building permit that increases the number of inhabitants, thus increased traffic, and any project affecting structural expansions on any Class 6 road and new development on a per house per building basis. The same could be levied on new commercial buildings at perhaps a different rate. If none of these are palatable, then perhaps a flat fee could be levied on all building permits, regardless of the purpose, as of dollars per thousand cost for obtaining a permit. No waivers should be accepted for any reason. This would ensure enforcement of our public safety improvement endeavor is reasonable, impartial, and balanced.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Barton. You will note, excuse me, that on our agenda is a discussion of that Class 6 proposal. It's based largely on your previous stuff, but thank you for your service. We'll address that. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Any other public comment? Hand up. Oh, Mr. Saunders.
Steve Saunders, Mass Road, Barrington. I see you have the Energy Committee on the agenda, both in terms of candidate recommendation and also the charter. And I totally support the formation, and I'm very happy you're creating an Energy Committee because I think it's long past due. And it doesn't overlap with a lot of other committees, and I appreciate the charter talks about working with them. For example, one thing that we do have under the planning board now is a strategic planning committee. And we're looking at land use as well as transportation chapters of the strategic plan this year. And we created survey that'll go out to residents and businesses with people that are participate in Barrington that includes questions related to energy and how to use the land. So I think that that's a good first point. We want to make sure we work with the committee, and we're more than willing to do that. Hope that they can participate in that process with the strategic planning committee as well. I really think I like to say that I review the candidate qualifications. There are people that have the expertise in that area, and I'm very happy to see that they're willing to volunteer their time to assist the town. So I think that's very good. I do have a concern about the current charge and the way it's written, and that there are a few issues in there that are really not nonpartisan, if you will, and where science does not prove. It mentions the reduction of greenhouse gases, which would say that the board then supports reduction of greenhouse gases, which includes CO2 that our forests make, that the algae and plant life in the seas need for the base of our food. Energy comes from all of the fish that we drink and in the whole life cycle of oxygen and CO2. And as long as greenhouse gas definition includes carbon dioxide, that's not something that is science that I think this board should consider and support. I think that one thing I would suggest is you might want to table this and let the new energy committee come up with a review of that and some edits that they might make sure that those kinds of issues are not there, because we really need to look at energy itself, reduction, cost effectiveness, and actually improving the environment as it relates to energy. So I think I would just suggest you not take that up today or else edit it today. Thank you.
Mr. Russell.
Okay. The Russell, 99 Toll Road. All right, speaking of energy, last Board of Selectmen meeting on September 12th, as our road agent Mark Moreau is requesting a $10 an hour raise for the town non-employee plow drivers. This isn't questioning the board's vote. This was something that caught my ear when Jim Secosia had mentioned that they receive free gas. That was the exact quote. Mark Moreau said, yes, they get free gas in addition to the $105 an hour. As a citizen, of course, I didn't think they just get free gas. I didn't think someone just turns the tap on and just lets them take as much as they want, or at least I would hope not. So that got me to send an email to our road agent, Mark Moreau, very respectful email I'm happy to publish, asking some very simple questions. I didn't get a response from Mark. And then either the next day or 2 days later, when I sent my second email, I got a response from Connor. And the email said I needed to be respectful of the road agent's job role during this busy time, and that Mark was too busy to respond to me. I think our public servants have a duty to respond. This wasn't 30 questions. This was 3 or 4. And the main question I had was very simple. I wanted to know what metric were the non-employee plow drivers issued this free gas. And I made it very simple. My question said, what methodology? Are they given the free gas based on hours worked, mileage driven, or other? And I was told, well, we're going to process a 91A, even though I did not request it. And you'll get your answer. I was given a date in October, and I didn't ask for a 91A. In fact, I said, do I need to request a 91A? But I didn't ask for one. I don't know Mark. I'm sure he's a very busy guy, but in the amount of time that I responded back and I messaged Dan, Mark could have easily responded to that email. It was a very simple, respectful answer. And when we're talking about diesel, which is very expensive, why not just say, how is it given out? Unless there's a problem, unless we are just handing the stuff out. What I ended up getting was a back and forth with Dan and over 4 emails where he said, Dan, and you said you would look into it for me. I assume you spoke to Mark at some point. I would hope you did. And then I thought you were gonna give me the answer, but you didn't. And then you said I would get the answer in the 91A. Then hold on, you did eventually. Then I said, well, okay, I'm just asking one question, hours, mileage, or other. And you said hours. So I just want to confirm for the record.
Point of order.
Go ahead.
I'm almost done. They get the free gas, and that's probably a terrible term to use in this day and age, but that was the quote. They get the fuel issued by the town, which I think it should have been said, based on the hours that they plow. Is that correct?
That's not correct, but we'll, as I said.
Your email to me said hours.
Point of order.
Yeah, they're paid by the hour.
We've far exceeded 3 minutes allowed.
I just want to know why are we not saying how they get issued free gas?
I can tell you how that's going to vary. Thank you for your comments.
Is there something we should be concerned about?
Point of order.
Yeah.
3 minutes. Have
Yeah,
passed.
That's not a discussion at this point, Mr. Russell. Thank you.
You clearly
As you know-
responded to the email
as you know.
hours.
As you know, this is not a discussion. You've made your
This
point.
doesn't look good. For you. You do understand this. This
Thank you,
is
sir.
our time.
Thank you, sir.
And with diesel at,
I'd like to make a motion for recess.
Time. Second for the motion.
you won't answer a very, very.
I haven't
simple
made a
question.
motion for recess.
Does this not concern anyone else?
I'm looking for a second.
How do we give the free gas?
Do I have a second?
Is it by
recess?
hours, mileage, or other?
You second the motion for recess.
What would,
just
I'm
want-
unclear. What are we gonna do in recess? I mean, I just assume a contract is public
Is
and
anybody
anybody
else
can look
concerned
at it,
about this?
right?
No,
I
not
believe
discuss-
Mr. Bailey made a point of order that the three
Not a
minute public.
discussion
comment-
during-
They have exceeded 3 minutes, but I'm requesting a very simple answer.
Discussion, and we.
Okay, I'll second it because we need to figure out a different time
In
to do
favor of
this.
recess?
Bailey.
Favor?
Yeah.
Okay, the
Thank
meeting
you.
is recessed, 6:47.
This looks terrible.
I make a motion to come back from the recess. What do we have to do?
I did, I just looked for
Oh,
a second.
okay, I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you said. I'll second.
And you will resume. Thank you. I would remind visitors, public comment, it is in the minutes, visitors should address the comments. And the visitors should not expect a response to their comments or questions. Since the select board may not have discussed or taken a position on the matter. Thank you. The school board representative is not here.
Can we see if there's anybody virtually
Oh,
looking to
sorry.
make a public comment,
Sorry.
or anybody else in person for that matter?
Yeah, anyone else? Sorry.
If you're participating virtually and you'd like to make a public comment, you can press *6 if you're on a phone, or if you're on your computer, you can raise your hand in the Teams program. let the chair know you're interested in speaking or wait to be recognized. Not seeing anything on my end, Mr. Chair.
All right.
Is there any way, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, is there any way to put a deflector on there so we can have a clear view on the outside and not just the little?
Work in progress.
That's all I need to hear. Thank you.
All right. That concludes the public hearing, public comment period. Public hearings, school board liaison. Don't see either of the school board members that normally report. Move on to section B, issuance of a building permit on Finney Way, private road for Joseph and Cheryl Wilson, map 118, lot 4.
Later on, Bill Wilson, and the owner. And I brought my property, I widened the road to 20 feet wide as far down as I could because of the shoreline protection down on the lake. And I exceeded the 10% by far. So far, and I'm still, tomorrow they're wrapping it all the way down, so we can drive down it and check it out. And I was looking to get a building permit.
And Mr. Chair, this is reviewed by staff and the planning board, and it meets the policy requirements for road improvements, with 10% improvements. That was reviewed by the planning board and supported as well. And so looking for the select board to consider authorizing the issuance of a permit, meeting the class 6 private road building policy.
Then I have a question, Mr. Bayless.
Sir, do you have any objections if any of us come down and look at that?
I'd love for you to.
Thank you very much. Okay. I'm all set.
They gravel on it tomorrow, so it'll be.
It works out better for you. I'll be able to see better. You're coming down the lake.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Mr.?
I'll make a motion that we, let me see the exact wording, that we approve the request from 79 Finney Way, Joseph and Cheryl Wilson, map 118, lot 4, that we approve that they have met the requirements for the class 6 and private road building policy
As proposed.
as proposed,
And authorize the issuance of a permit.
and authorize the issue of a permit.
Great, thank you.
The words to that effect.
Second.
Are there's a second. Are there any comments? Any other public comment?
No, I just,
Hearing
no,
none.
I just want to say a great presentation. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm sorry for the delay that we caused, from before, but it's something we have to do.
Oh, yeah.
Hearing,
My father was a selectman.
hearing no other public comments, go to a vote. Mr. Gibson
Gibson, aye.
Capiello, aye.
Bailey, aye.
and Shrek, aye. Thank you very much. Sir. Thank you. Budget presentation. Excuse me, Mr. Diver.
Yes, thank you. So a few items before I pull up the PowerPoint, which I will keep brief. But first, the budget process is really a year-long process in the municipal sector. And a lot of credit is deserved of the department heads and teams who spend part of the year without a budget, January through March. Part of the year spending the budget that they worked on 18 months ago. And then they start developing next year's budget in July, June sometimes, to present to me in early September. I work with them to finalize a proposal that goes to the select board and the budget committee late September, early October. And this is a budget that takes us through the end of 2023. So we're talking 18 months from when we start the process. And it's much different than private sector budgeting. And it takes a lot of effort from the staff that we have. So much gratitude for the work that they've done and continue to do, especially in the turbulent economic times. Second, I know we have a couple of board members that haven't been through the budget process before, and community members that should also be interested. So members of the select board and the budget committee have a budget binder, a printed copy of the budget binder. But this process is about a lot more than the select board and the budget committee. And so every document in the budget binder is available on the town's website at barrington.nh.gov/2023 budget. And that same level of detail and all the documents from the 2022 process, the 2021 process, and in a little bit of a different format in 2020 as well. And so that's really valuable for the historical perspective when we look at what we're asking the select board to consider supporting, and then ultimately we're asking the voters to support in March of 2023. So the budget binder is organized by chapter. The first 10 chapters are background information, things like our budget and expenditure history, revenue information, unassigned fund balance details, our balances held by the treasurer and the capital reserves, DRA forms, tax rate information, et cetera. And then the chapters following that are each department. So each department head is responsible for a portion of the budget, and all the backup information, narrative, detailed history is available in those sections. And then there's some sections towards the end reserved for when we head into deliberative session and the voting session. So if you have questions as board members or members of the community about the budget binder, don't hesitate to reach out and ask. We try to make every piece of information available as soon as possible. Mr. Bailey, please.
Thank you much. I just am jumping ahead on your proposal, but on page 318, the Barrington, New Hampshire.gov 23 budget, is that active now?
Yes, sir.
That's good. Thank you.
Absolutely. So again, yeah, please, Joyce.
As part of the budget presentation, we have an advisory budget committee minutes, and I would just ask the ABC to identify people. It says here, Connor addressed John's email, and there's a number of points, but we don't know who John is. So if it could be documented with last names of people, it would be helpful.
Absolutely. No problem. So the process department heads, as I said, each individually develop their budget in a similar format. They submit that to me as the town administrator. I work with them individually to identify a budget proposal that we're both comfortable with, making changes based on the requests of other departments. And we discuss it at department head meetings, and the result is an initial budget request to be presented to the budget committee and the select board. The budget committee plays an important part of the process, important role through the process in Barrington. They're an advisory budget committee, so the select board holds all of the authority to finalize the budget and present it to voters. But the budget committee meets each week before a select board meeting, the Tuesday before a Monday meeting, reviews the budget section that is up for review at the next select board meeting, sometimes meets with the department head or submits questions to them, and develops proposals to be recommended to the select board for consideration at the select board meeting. That process has been refined over the years, and in the last 2 years, the select board has made no additional changes outside of what the budget committee has recommended. So the budget committee really does a lot of the detailed work with the budget at the line item level through the budget process. So they play a critical part of the process. Steve Saunders is the chair. He's here in the audience. Scott Shepard is a member. We also have Bill Irving, who's a prospective member online. Michael Houst, also a member of the budget committee online, finance administrator as well. And Dannon is the select board liaison to the budget committee. So that's the process and the role of the ABC. Any questions before I dive into the presentation? Fantastic.
We interrupt.
That is John Morris. I'm sorry.
Can we interrupt? He goes through. We have a question.
Please. So the select board members have the benefit of this presentation being printed in your packet. You have a copy of that. It's also on the town's website. So if you see anything and blow past it, it can be reviewed for after the fact. So I think it's important to set the stage a little bit about where Barrington is. Obviously, we're looking at where we're going with a budget request into 2023. One of the more important metrics for this budget presentation and this budget development process is the consumer price index and the inflation that we've been experiencing. It's no surprise, we felt it in our own pocketbooks, any business industry that we're in, and municipalities have felt that as well. So the consumer price index data is in chapter 3 of the budget binder, so you can see the full table of the data that this comes from. But the 18-month inflation, based on the consumer price index data, 9.67%. And the last 12 months is 7.19%. As anybody who monitors the social security cost of living, that's expected to be, high single digits, cost of living increase starting in 2023. So we're really in recent memory, unprecedented times from inflation. Department heads have done very well spending inside the approved budget. Again, we proposed a budget 18 months in advance. Nobody could have anticipated the inflation that we've experienced. But as we look ahead to 2023, certain cost increases are inevitable to maintain the same level of service. Population is up about 118 people, and that's a population estimate, but from 2020, the 2020 census showed an average increase of about 75 people a year. Average household income in Barrington is nearly $100,000 with a poverty rate of 3.5%. Which for the state is, the average household income is higher, the poverty rate is lower, and even for our region, that's very competitive. Mr. Bailey.
Please, on the last two items, the 98 and the 92%, it says here sources 2020, is that for those two also, not just for the last one? So you have a figure here of 98,275, and then you have a 3.5% and a 92 owner occupied housing. Is that off the census report?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That's all I had.
And a 92.1% owner occupied housing, which isn't atypical for what I would say rural New Hampshire is, but still an interesting metric.
How would that be affected by the Route 4? Just down the street here, with the building the new units there. Are those for sale or are those rental? I was told they were rental.
9?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Route 9.
Yeah, so each of those, whether if they're apartments, then that would contribute to the, the 7.9%.
Okay, thank you.
And if they're turned into condos and people buy them, then those would be considered owner occupied.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so a big part of the budget is outside of expenditures is revenue. Obviously, we have a variety of revenue sources, and that's just as important because at the end of the day, in my opinion, the most important number is the tax rate. And the tax rate doesn't come from just expenditures, it comes from revenue as well. And so in Barrington, this year, 2022 is the first year that actually less than 50% of our revenue for the municipal government comes from property taxes. And obviously 48%, it's not much less than 50. But these are our revenue categories. Property taxes, the biggest. Vehicle registration, we collect over $2 million a year through vehicle registration. Obviously, that makes up a quarter of our budget. State and federal aid, that was the biggest jump in 2022, was in this category. The legislature, driven by Governor Sununu, instituted dramatic increases in the rooms and meals tax distribution. And so we hope to continue to see that level of funding through the future. The fees for service, this is going to be things like pay as you throw at the transfer station, when you buy a pistol permit at the police department, if you pay for a copy at the planning office, building permit fees, another big category, and then miscellaneous funding throughout our locally collected interest on investments would be an example, interest and penalties on delinquent taxes, et cetera. So you'll notice on the budget presentation down at the bottom, you'll see a citation to the 2023 budget. So chapter 5 is all about revenue. So this information in detail can be found in chapter 5, and that's an active link. So this presentation on the town's website will take folks right directly to where that backup information is. So obviously, like I said, we all care most about the property tax rate. These are the numbers dating back to 2014 of what our municipal tax rate has been. And graphically, you can see that it has continued to decrease over the last 10 years. You don't see all 10 years here. That doesn't mean that our budget has gotten smaller. It certainly hasn't. But as the town has continued to grow, the valuation of the town has continued to grow. The municipal budget has not grown at the same rate. So we have been outpaced by the growth of the valuation in town, by the school budget, and by the county budget. And I think that's a credit to the department heads, the budget committee, and the select board, maintaining a laser focus on making sure that the tax rate is as reasonable as possible. It's important to keep in mind that Barrington's tax rate is $19.50 per thousand of valuation. Only $2.95 of that is the municipal portion, so 15%. So, this board and the process that we're going through has a direct impact on the tax rate, but proportionally a fairly small impact. The school is the biggest at 70 and the county's at 11% as well. So this is some data that I crunched for the first time last year, and it really stunned me when I dug into it. And so I've shared it as opportunities have presented themselves. So, living in Barrington, as we all do, Barrington feels small. It doesn't feel like it's overly populated. There's some development, but, we still have space. We still have breathing room. It doesn't feel like the tax rate's too big. So when you look at the 234 municipalities in the state, really it starts to tell a different story about Barrington's size just by the numbers. And when you compare that to what our municipal tax rate is, there's really a huge disparity, which again, I think speaks to how lean our municipal government is and how much folks have worked to keep the government services limited to what we need, what residents need, and focused on doing well in the services we provide. So looking left to right, our total tax rate of 1950 is in the 40th percentile, so about middle of the road for the overall tax rate. The $2.95 municipal tax rate is in the 8th percentile of all 234 municipalities. Population at 9,326 residents, we're in the 87th percentile. There's only 13% of the communities in the state have a larger population than Barrington. But if you divide our tax rate, our municipal tax rate per person, we're in the 7th percentile. So the municipal tax rate per person is very small in Barrington. Land area at 47 square miles, we're in the 81st percentile. There's only 19 communities that have more land area than Barrington. And if you divide the tax rate by square mile, we're in the 7th percentile. Again, similar population. Our valuation of 1.4 billion is in the 84th percentile. Only 16% of the communities have more value in their town, property value, than Barrington does. But when you divide our tax rate by valuation, we're in the 14th percentile. So I think this tells a strong story. I'm not sure exactly what, but I think it's important to keep these numbers in mind. The last one, which isn't part of this presentation, is I mentioned that our $2.95 municipal tax rate is 15% of our overall tax rate. Maybe the most striking or dramatic metric is that at 15%, if you look at what portion the municipal tax rate is of the total tax rate for all 234 municipalities, line them up, we're in the 4th percentile. So there's only 8 communities in the state that have a smaller portion than 15%. And 5 of those communities have a population less than 1,000. They don't have a police department. They don't have a fire department. They certainly don't have 80 miles of road that they maintain. So I've included the data sources down here, but like I said, I honestly actively look for opportunities to share that information because I find it very striking. So, we have a lean government, but we're very financially stable. And that's, again, credit to the effort of department heads, budget committee, and select board. We have a stable municipal tax rate. So again, the growth has been outpaced from the growth of our municipal tax rate. You've seen that graph falling. Our unassigned fund balance, the DRA recommends we target between 8 and 17%. We have 12.3%, almost 4 million. That's essential for cash flow in case of emergency. And that's really a sign of a strong, stable community to maintain unassigned fund balance like that. Historically, the select board has supported using what I'll call surplus unassigned fund balance. So unassigned fund balance in excess of the 12.5% towards capital projects. And this is just a brief history of what the funding level of capital projects that the select board has been able to accomplish through this process. Last year was 726,000, the year before that, 538, et cetera. And so that process has allowed the community to support very essential capital projects, typically setting money aside for future purchases like fire trucks and highway trucks, things like that, work on bridges and culverts. And that has continued to be a successful model. I suspect that the conversation will be very different this year because we won't have as much surplus unassigned fund balance to work with, maybe between $100,000 and $300,000. And so the budget committee has already begun the conversation on how to address that and what strategies to take in order to make sure we maintain our level of funding for our important capital projects, but also being responsible of our commitment to maintaining a 12.5% level of unassigned fund balance. Brief graph, we don't need to spend a lot of time on this, but the green bar, that's how much unassigned fund balance we have used for capital projects. The orange bar is what we've had available for unassigned fund balance, and each of those are dollar values. You read the numbers on the left. And then that line, that orange line at the top, is what percentage of our regular general fund operating expenditures our fund balance has been maintained at. So again, 12.5 is the target, and we've been there dating back to 2014 and even higher in some instances. And you'll see, you know, we were at a peak about 2017, 2019, we used a lot, brought us back down to about 12.5%. So now that we have that foundation of our revenue and financial stability and our tax rate, it's time to talk about the 2023 budget proposal. So the budget that we're in right now, the 2022 budget, 7.6 million, an $8.3 million budget is proposed. That's an increase of 650,000 or just under 8.5%. So similar to last year, this was a similar proportion of how much the increase last year was. 77% of that increase is the result of these 4 bullet points on this slide. And all of them are wage and benefit driven. And so starting at the top, and we won't go into a lot of detail, these will be presented again in each individual department's presentation. But during 2022, the select board authorized the creation of the 4th full-time firefighter. So that decision has been made, is funded in the 2023 budget at 100%. That budget value is $96,000. The library has proposed during the 2023 budget development process, regrading a position and moving it from part-time to full-time, and adding a library page position as a part-time position. Right now, that value is $65,000. Honestly, the library trustees have made a few changes to their budget proposal since all of these numbers were crunched. So you'll see those updates as we develop through the process. But that's where we started. Yes, sir.
Again, with prior time to look at.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
So, yeah, you'll notice that the narrative, the budget narrative is missing in the library. And so I'm working with the director and the trustee chair to get that updated. So you don't have to replace it, but it's accurate the first time it's in your binder.
Thank you,
So
sir.
as soon as that's available to me, I'll print you copies and make sure that it's available to you. So the police department. In 2022, the police department created a budget funded at 75%, essentially to start in April. So that 25% additional is in the 2023 budget, that's 16,000. And the police chief has been successful in hiring essentially a per diem officer to cover available shifts. This is Joshua Turner. Right now, it's just him in this role, but a Barrington resident who's a part-time certified officer. And the goal of adding hours for a per diem officer is to allow for shift coverage. So all backfilled shifts don't need to be covered with overtime. And so ultimately, this is a budget reduction strategy in order to reduce the amount of overtime used in the department. And quite honestly, the staff constantly being called on to backfill shifts. We still have an officer that's deployed depending on our country. We've had turnover. And so those vacancies created a tremendous demand on the staff of the department. And they welcome the opportunity to have somebody else in the pool to fill these shifts. Other staffing changes, this last category, census updates. This is primarily health insurance elections. You know, maybe a position turns over. The incumbent had an in lieu of benefit and the new hire maybe has a family plan. And that difference is, you know, $25,000. And so it doesn't take too many census changes in order to make a pretty big impact. And so right now that's 104,000. Pay plan and cost of living adjustment built into the budget accounts for $70,000 and $66,000 respectively. Benefit cost increases, again, we budget 18 months in advance. We don't know all of these numbers at the beginning of the process. We get a clearer picture of where our benefit costs are going to be towards the middle and end of October. And so right now I've estimated a 10% increase in each benefit category. Last year, that was low. It was closer to 12%. I'm hoping this year, based on the information that we've received, that will be adequate and hopefully we'll see that number reduce a little bit. Finally, the custodial services at the Public Safety Building, Recreation and Highway Garage were formerly a contracted service of the SAU. They canceled that contract. We actually hired the custodian that they were using previously to do the same services. So we've moved money from the general government buildings contracts into general government buildings wages. So you'll see that increase there.
Should we repeat the areas maybe again, please?
Public Safety Building,
Yes,
Recreation, and the Highway Garage. That's about a 15 to 20 hour week position.
thank you, sir.
Absolutely. Okay, moving on again. So now looking ahead to the 2023 revenue projections and what impacts I anticipate. The outlook isn't doom and gloom, but it also isn't sunshines and rainbows. So the state approved budget with increases to the rooms and meals tax is expected to continue. They changed the formula, so it's based on what the state collects in rooms and meals tax revenue, which has been stable post-COVID. So we continue to see that level of funding. Highway block grant is also expected to stay stable. Motor vehicle registrations have plateaued. We've been on a pretty steady 8-year increase that has been almost statistically perfect. And so that has stabilized. It isn't decreasing, but it isn't increasing at the same rate. Again, that's 25% of our total revenue. So that's a close one to watch. We pay very close attention to that. Building permit revenue has also stabilized. We saw a big jump after the 2021 fee structure update. That went into effect in January. So that has stabilized. We can continue to see about $200,000 worth of revenue in that revenue category. Interest on investments is probably the only rosy part of this. As interest rates have risen, so too have our interest on investments. In 2022, I estimated that we'd collect about $15,000 in interest. In the month of August, we collected over $15,000 just for that month. And interest rates have risen. On deposit in the bank, we fluctuate between about $6 million at our low to about $14 million at our high. And so it's nice to be able to have that money working for us, generating interest, but that's only possible when interest rates exist, which they didn't for a few years. And then interest and penalties on delinquent taxes. I know I've talked with this board about this a few times, but it bears repeating because this is also a remarkable metric. We are at an all-time low for our delinquency rate. What that means is more people in Barrington are paying their taxes on time than they ever have. And that's a great thing. That's positive. Hopefully that speaks positively about the financial situation of our residents or the support available to them. So one of the things that means is the interest and penalties that they are charged when they don't pay their taxes on time, which are statutorily set. As more people pay them on time, we collect less interest and penalties on delinquent taxes. When I started in Barrington, we collected over $250,000 a year. My estimate for 2022 is, I think, $87,000. So, that's a lot of revenue that we don't have from that source. It's a positive thing, but that has to be made up for somewhere else nonetheless. So that's revenue. General information in the budget. We talked about the step and the cost of living adjustment. Later on the agenda tonight, I'm going to talk about the wage study recommendations. I have a placeholder in the budget to fund the recommendations of the wage study. So this budget proposal that you see now already includes the money necessary to implement that, should that be the board's choice. We'll talk more about that when the time comes. And as I said, I've estimated a 10% increase in insurances. Just a real quick review of budget lines, individual budget lines, other than wages and benefits that have increased over $10,000. The incident funds, extra $60,000 in there. That's the placeholder to fund the wage study implementation. Admin contracts is up $15,000 as we continue to make our cybersecurity more robust and introduce more redundancy. A lot of those services have ongoing costs. I would say they're critical in their recommendation of our recent cybersecurity audit. Electricity, vehicle fuel, I don't have heating fuel on here because it didn't increase over 10,000, but no surprise to see big increases, big percentage increases in these categories. In chapter 11, you'll find an updated vehicle fuel analysis if you're interested in looking at the numbers. I'm glad to report that our vehicle fuel usage has been on a relatively steady decline over the past 4 years, making sure that we're only using our vehicles and equipment when we need to and trying to consolidate trips, especially in the highway department. We've also had milder winters, which has helped tremendously. And so that analysis is in here. Still, costs have gone up dramatically. And so you'll see those reflected in the budget. Paving. So we all know that as the cost of fuel goes up, any petroleum product goes up as well, including asphalt. And so if we leave our paving budget level funded, we can no longer do as much as we did the year before. And so we have a road improvement plan prepared by CMA engineers. In order to fund that, we need to consistently increase how much we're contributing to paving. This year, the budget increase of 50,000 is also accompanied by a warrant article, same as last year, for 100,000 into a non-lapsing account, and also a proposal to use $100,000 of the SB 401 road money towards paving in 2023, which would give us a total budget of 850,000 and get us a lot closer to where we need to be. But we should expect to continue to see increases in paving budget in future years. Winter contractors. So again, as the rate increases that the select board authorized at the last meeting, and with the fuel allowance that the select board instituted in 2021, that's based on the price of fuel and the rates were set, and what the AAA rates for fuel are at the time, the pay period that they're in. As those costs have increased, we need to increase the winter contractor budget to accommodate that. We talked about that at the last meeting. Salt and sand, there was a dramatic increase after the budget process in 2021. And so there was a 43% increase in late December 2021. And right now we have spent, as of, well, the salt shed is full, but we have spent all of our salt and sand money that's in the budget for 2022. We have available surplus within the highway department. I don't expect that we'll have to dip into the capital reserve, but you're seeing essentially a 2-year increase in that $45,000 to accommodate the increase in salt. So the winter maintenance budgets are relatively tightly budgeted, mostly because there's a $200,000 capital reserve for emergency road repair or winter maintenance. So should we have a banner winter and overspend the budget, we have a capital reserve that we can dip into. And so, nobody has a crystal ball to know what the winter is. I mean, I've measured my sunflowers, but I also don't think that that's what we should be basing our budget on. And so but we shouldn't be budgeting for the worst winter we can imagine. It's not a responsible way to budget. But having a capital reserve as an emergency to dip into is a responsible way to do. There are budget decreases as well of over $10,000. We talked about general government buildings contracts, our lease at the old town hall, and the rental of the storage unit. It's not in the budget. Vehicle maintenance, as we institute a robust preventative maintenance program in the highway department, we continue to see new vehicles come online. Our maintenance needs are reducing as well. That budget has been reduced year over year. Bulky waste at the transfer station, as advised by the Transfer Station and Recycling Center Review Committee, has recommended new policies that limit the usage of outside contractors in our bulky waste. That has reduced the utilization and thus reduced our need to budget. And so recycling, there's now a commodity, albeit a small commodity market for recycling, but our direct expenditures are reduced as a result of that. General assistance, based on an 8-year trend, that budget can be reduced based on the need in town. And bond interest, we don't intend to borrow for the Newtown Hall. And so that money that we had in as we awaited Chris Sununu's effort to get us a $1.5 million grant. What did I say?
Soon.
Chris Noonan. Yeah, Chris Pappas, thank you. Credit where credit's due. His name's on the plaque, so, you know,
Yeah. Nice job.
make no mistake. Okay, so those are the budget decreases that are in the budget. Now warrant articles. Well, like I said, I think we're gonna be spending a lot of time on these, other than just an overview. I don't think it's necessary to dig into detail here. As costs have gone up, so too has our need to set more money aside to fund the things, the capital projects that we have. Last year it was 762,000. This year the total is 1.1 million. And as I said towards the beginning of the presentation, I expect that we'll have about $100,000 to $300,000 of unassigned fund balance surplus, which means that the select board and the budget committee are going to have to think critically about how to fund these capital reserve requests. And I would expect continued conversation between the budget committee and the select board on that topic. So that is the presentation that I wanted to make to you and to the community. Again, the budget binder is available electronically. Anybody is welcome to send questions. Phone number and email address is there. And like I said, all of the materials in the binder are available online. The last thing I'll draw your attention to in the town administrator report, Joyce, you had mentioned the advisory budget committee minutes. So every budget meeting, you'll have a copy of the minutes from the former meeting. We'll make sure to get last names back in there. And how the budget process has been done in years past is the department head will make the presentation. Tonight, that was me. In the future, it will be your department heads from your various departments. The advisory budget committee would be invited to comment anything additional to their minutes. And then the select board would be asked to review and comment and consider any changes, to make incremental changes throughout the process, so that we don't wait until the end of the last budget meeting in December to start making changes. So if there's a budget line that, you know, you say, I really would like to see that reduced $5,000, now's the time to talk about it. In the budgets that would be in chapter 11 that I presented. And so that has worked well. I encourage the select board to consider continuing that trend. And I know that the chair of the budget committee is here and available to speak if you are interested.
Anyone like, anyone have questions? Mr. Saunders is here. Mr. Bailey.
Oh, no, Mr. Saunders.
Any questions?
Well, maybe a question, Connor. So the requested warrant article for the emergency communication capital reserve. So we got quite a bit of money this year for that, right? For putting emergency communication in the town hall. So does that offset some of what we would need for this year?
Great question. No. So we applied for $125,000 emergency communications grant for this building. That's going to fund a full building generator and emergency operations center equipment. What we've been setting money aside for has been the police and fire department radio infrastructure needs. So on the police department, that's mostly radios. They're part of the Stratford County dispatch network. And so Stratford County, it's been in the news last couple of years. They're undergoing a robust improvement to their system, their radio infrastructure, new repeaters, new sites, et cetera. We'll pay for that through our dispatch fees, but we won't use the capital reserve for that. On the fire side, the fire is part of a regional communications network dispatched by UNH. And so we own the tower next to Ramsdale Lane. We have a repeater on it. As you know, we've been going through a process to add a repeater. The antenna was actually just installed last week for the highway department. They haven't had a viable radio network in town. And through winter maintenance activities, a lot of them have to pull over and rely on their cell phone, which isn't great. And so the select board has supported improvements there. So the funds that we're setting aside are to continue making improvements to those two repeaters and the network, the radios in the departments, and also the radios for the police department.
Thank you for that clarification.
Right, please.
Improvements to the police department down the road. would that be something that gets a capital reserve, or is that just too big a project to be bonded and not falling in this category?
That's up to the select board. So there's multiple ways to approach funding for a big project. You've heard about it with the library the last couple of years. So the select board can identify a goal to set money aside towards the future, expansion, renovation, expansion of the public safety building. Bonding is the more typical approach. So I'd love to say that that the history books are written in such a way that for this building, the select board planned over a period of 5 or 6 years to use $1 million from unassigned fund balance, from the surplus of unassigned fund balance towards this project. But I really don't think that was the case. I think over the years that the unassigned fund balance continued to build up. And in 2018, preparing for 2019, the select board saw that, hey, we can use that money towards this project. I think it's more typical across the state to see big projects like that simply be bonded at the time that they're needed because the need isn't as easy to identify years in advance, like the replacement of a fire truck as a for instance. But it's really up to the select board, the funding strategy. One anecdote on that, there's a theoretical argument on both sides. So when you save money, put money aside and build up a savings account, you have taxpayers that are paying into that pool that may never benefit from what you're buying with the money. So we set $150,000 a year for, new culverts. And, residents of Barrington right now are paying for that. But if they move next year, they're not going to benefit from it. Bonding, alternatively, is a direct impact on the people that are experiencing whatever you're doing. And so there's some communities that you'll find that only bond large projects, knowing that it costs more dollars overall because you're paying interest and you're paying it over time, but to shift the burden to the taxpayers that are benefiting from it. So it's really up to the select board, the political decision makers. Mr. Van, do you have a question?
Yes, I did. I really did. I was looking, just the time now to discuss line items.
Have you started presenting?
No, I'm ready. Yes, it won't be presented any more than it already has.
Okay.
Okay, line item, custodial, services. I noticed that we have 2 line items, one for $1,300 and one for $1,040. And one of those, let's see here, which one is going to take care of the rec and the public service and the highway?
One is wages and one is benefits. So those are two sides of the same.
Two
coin.
different names, sir.
Oh, so tell me the numbers again.
I'll tell you the numbers again. Here they are.
Oh, you were looking at the hours. If you scroll over all the way to the right of that page, you'll see the wages.
4112 and 4112. It's 2 individuals.
We have 25,000, 17,000. So Diane Carter is the custodian. The first one is the custodian for the public safety building, the recreation, and the highway garage.
Okay.
And Dana Martell is the custodian for the town hall.
Throughout conversations earlier that I'm saying to you that we need to have at least 6 hours a day to turn around and clean this building. We've got 10,000, 12,000 would require 1 FTE. And you know what my business was before, so that's why I'm saying what I'm doing. And I would really hate to see this go downhill by not being clean. The equipment is covered under what line item for here? We buy our own equipment, or is it dependent upon the custodial service to provide the equipment?
We are the custodial services, so yeah, it's in our general government buildings budget. And to your point, I don't disagree. I think what we will, so there's 2 factors at play. First, that would generally be the responsibility of the facility manager to identify what's working, what isn't, what we need. And so in my conversations with the school facility manager going into this building, we had talked about, waiting till the building was built, identifying what was possible, what the custodial services needs were, to figure out what the best strategy was, what the custodian or maybe a separate contractor on top of that. Obviously, that
That's past.
facility manager isn't available to us anymore. And so in the short term, we're making sure our short-term needs are met But one model that we're investigating is complementing our custodial services staff, our employee, with a weekly or a bi-weekly cleaning where they'll bring in a floor machine, do the deep cleaning, the windows and the floors, that isn't done every day, but on a schedule to be done. So, but that's yet to be determined. And if there's a
Ladies,
budget
forgive me.
impact-
But if you think I'm gonna park my keister on a dirty seat, that's not what's exactly what I'm getting to. We must control the germs on this part here. That's why I say to you, it has to be cleaned on a daily basis.
Yep, toilet and trash are done
Yeah.
on a daily basis.
Yeah, like which floors, you're gonna have sand pretty soon, you're gonna have salt, you're gonna have walk-off matting that you have to look at. I'm not trying to be difficult, Mr. Chair, I really am not, but these are things that we have the public coming in here, and I don't wanna have somebody come up before me and say, we just spent over all X $1.9 million, we didn't sit here, you're not even taking care of what we bought, what's going on? I don't wanna have to hear that, so that's why I'm pressing, I'm pressing you hard on custodial service because I wanna keep what we have.
Okay. Do you have a recommendation on the general government buildings budget?
No, I haven't, that's why I guess, to be honest with you, I just found the page this morning, I would look this morning rather, and then I couldn't find it, then when we were going through it, I found it on chapter 11, almost 3/4 of the way, that's my fault, because I didn't put enough time this morning, find it, that's why I asked, but
Great.
no, I really think we need to, discuss that and, put there, I mean, 6 hours, 5 hours a day would be a very minimum you'd need here, because you have limited space for the public to go into. So,
Thank you.
thank you, I appreciate it. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I really take your time.
Okay. What we're doing here. Mr. Gibson.
I assume that all the existing capital reserve funds are kind of tracked on an ongoing real-time basis as far as they're on track to fund certain things, as opposed to, do they ever start to grow in excess such that you can put a warrant to use some of the capital reserves for certain things too?
It's a good question and it varies. So as you'll see during each department's budget presentation, each department presents in a different way their needs and the tracking for their needs. The budget committee has done well over the years to work with department heads to develop good plans to make sure that we're on target. I can tell you that I don't think there's an example of any capital reserve where we have a perceived surplus. I think alternatively, the budget committee would articulate that there are many capital reserves that are underfunded at the rate that we're funding them. To your point about moving from one capital reserve to another, the funds are not set up to do that easily. So the select board is the agents to expend from capital reserves, most capital reserves. And those funds need to be spent for the purpose that the fund was established. So voters at town meeting could move money from one fund to another. But if you change the purpose, then it requires a 60% vote. And so if you want to use money from a capital reserve for a purpose other than which it was established, you're actually better off to close the capital reserve, which takes a 50% vote, and create a new capital reserve, which requires a 50% vote. So it's nuanced.
And to transfer that money from the original cancel back into the new one, does that require 50% of it?
Yeah, it doesn't go directly. So my favorite term during budget development is that money's fungible. Figured I'd leave it off the table here at the initial budget presentation, but we left the door wide open, George.
Yeah.
So $1 is $1. If you add 50,000 from a capital reserve to the town coffers and then ask voters to appropriate 50,000, it's not the same dollar that's moving from here to there, but it has the same impact on the things we care about, like the tax rate.
What would you think would be an equitable, if we were to, instead of to raise the hours, from, that would be, I would do 25 a week times 52, so that would be, you know. Yeah, I see.
Mr. Bailey, if you're interested, could I propose maybe putting on the agenda as a regular agenda item at an upcoming meeting, custodial services at the town hall? To present some proposals to the select board and the possible funding requirements, and maybe you and I can brainstorm about that.
Would you ask the chair, please? That's his.
No, I think that's a reasonable thing. You have expertise, Connor has expertise. I don't think, I do. Don't know. Just have more expertise than you.
Oh,
That
no,
seems appropriate.
Thank you, Art. I guess I'll sit down with you sometime and discuss with him and put it down that way. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
great.
Sorry, board members, if I took the time.
No worries.
Any comments from the advisory budget committee, please?
I'll be brief to try to say tonight, but, and one of the things that I wanted to emphasize is that each year we try to make such improvements in the process. So we're always willing to hear your suggestions on how the process is going, and if we can make it better, we will. This year, one change that we are implementing is that every department head has been invited to our ABC meetings when we're considering their departmental budget. Last year, we didn't invite them. We would go through it, ask questions, submit those questions to them. They'd have to turn around and write them out. And it was a little bit more cumbersome for the department heads. In this way, our minutes, and our minute taker will have the burden put on them to document the questions and answers so that you have them ahead of time. And then when the department head presents his budget to you each week, hopefully all those questions that we had are answered, and you would have more to add to them, and they would be able to answer those. So I think that's one thing that you'll see. It'll be a little bit different than we did last year. I'm very happy that the board has invited us to participate like they have. And I want to thank the board for continuing to listen to our concerns and advice. Like Connor mentioned, the unassigned fund balance is going to be the real issue this year. Warrant articles, each department head will present those. We'll discuss them in detail with them at their meeting, and then they would come in here and do the same thing. We tend to withhold total judgment on funding sources until the final, as we get down toward it, where we know what our revenue sources are, what the actual surplus might be that's available to go to fund balance. We do look at the 12.5% as a very important target for us to keep. We know some municipalities don't meet that goal, and it is there, but it creates more risk than we're comfortable with, especially with the economy that's going down. So just want to thank the board for letting us participate.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you very much.
I forgot the most important part.
Oh, yeah.
So 3 years ago, the budget process kicked off as my birthday. And so I thought as a cute way to start the budget process, I'd bring cupcakes. It was a huge hit. We got everything we asked for that year, everything. And department heads followed suit. They each brought a sweet treat for the board. So I've already challenged department heads to follow the process from 3 years ago. But last night, I made no-bake cookies that have peanut butter, you know, that's not a problem for anybody, and chocolate. So please help yourself.
So when the department heads bring gifts, is this unethical?
No, well, see, I think the dollar value is so low that it's, you know, really just to make those long meetings more palatable, that's all.
I just came from my doctor's office today. He said cupcakes were the only thing that I was able to eat
Always.
outside of my regular meal.
Always.
I just thought you'd like to know.
If we go past 8:30, I'll send it back.
Okay, great.
Did we, have we received anything from Social Security or the federal government on their anticipation of what they plan on using for anything like that, like we had in the past?
I'd
Or we're
love to
gonna-
get advance word, but no, we get news the same time as everybody else. Like I said earlier, based on the trusted sources that I follow, namely the AARP, the cost of living adjustment is expected to be in the high single digits. I think it was 5.8 is what they landed on for 2022. Anybody fact check me on that? Something like that, but I think they're expecting it to be higher than that.
Yeah, because I know the Fed had an emergency meeting today and they haven't been able to see any results from it, so. I just hope it's not another 1% raise. All right, thank you, sir. I'm done.
Yeah, I think that's usually middle of.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. It's, you know.
Yeah, okay, moving on to consent agenda. Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended?
I had a proposal in there, sorry, Mr. Chair. If you're interested in just carbon copying the appointments that are up for second review that we discussed at the last meeting, I added a note in there, adding appointment 7A, I through V, and 7B, I through II, to the consent agenda, just so you don't have to take an individual vote on all those. There are a couple of appointments that are on first reading, and those wouldn't be included, obviously.
Right. Are you going to have a,
We need a motion.
no,
I move that we include the appointments to the Energy Committee and the ABC as part of the consent agenda.
could we accept Mr. Panish, because that'll be a first?
No,
That's-
but it says he's not, we're not going to
We're
vote
not
on
voting
him
on it.
until
No.
October 17th.
But we might.
Yeah, first hand discussion was the bench.
On both.
Her intent is to exclude him.
That's right. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. All right, are we moving?
Is there a second?
I'll second.
We haven't moved yet. That's okay.
Oh, that's.
She did.
She did.
Oh,
Yeah.
I apologize. You second, all in favor?
Aye.
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 All right,
That was to amend and approve the consent agenda, or just to amend?
that was to amend, I thought.
Okay, so now we need one to approve as
Right.
amended.
So moved.
Second.
Gibson, all in favor?
Aye.
That much to the appointments, first reading, Mr. Panish. Any comments? If asked to be part of the Energy Committee and also
Had the opportunity to review the paperwork that's sent to me, and I see he'd be a great individual for those two committees.
any other comments, then we will bring him to a vote at our next meeting. Staff report.
Yes, thank you.
Never.
So, we're here the first of a few meetings in October. We only have one October work anniversary. And it's our esteemed police officer, Sam Sarosky, who continues to valiantly fight for our freedom overseas. We expect him back at this point early next year. We will welcome him back at that time. And so he, as of October, he will work for the town for 3 years, and a great addition to the department. Wanted to make sure the select board was aware of the New Hampshire Municipal Association Annual Conference scheduled for November 16th and 17th. I included some information on registration. I'm happy to help you register if you're interested. They have in-person and virtual options. And I will be there the whole time. Fortunately, as a board member for the New Hampshire Municipal Association, they pay my way. And as a response to that, I'll be helping to host certain components of the conference. So I'll be there and you're all welcome. Newtown Hall Open House. So a little bit of an update from the last time we met. A committee of staff has been meeting to organize the open house for the town hall, the Newtown Hall here. And so after reviewing a variety of dates, the committee has decided that Thursday, October 27th would be best for the open house. The event's going to be scheduled from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. And they're working to line up a series of events and dedications during that window. And as those details are finalized, they'll be made available to the public. But mark your calendars. Yes, Ms. Capiello.
Is this in addition to, we've said that there would be an open house during the voting day on October 18th
In place of.
in place of?
Yes.
So I have put out written and verbal invitations, so you will be happy to give a tour if people show up on the 18th.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So I'll provide a brief introduction to the next topic and the chair can jump in, anything he'd like to add. So the chair was contacted by a concerned resident regarding the ongoing drought conditions and water conservation in general. And so I provided some resources here that the Department of Environmental Services here in New Hampshire makes available, including their drought monitor map and also drought and water conservation resources for municipalities and individuals. The last time the select board talked about this was 2 years ago during the what was a worse drought than this year. And RSA 41:11-D, surprisingly, it's surprising to me, but gives municipalities the authority to control the use of private wells for lawn watering. And there's a hearing process the select board would have to go through, and it's only during drought conditions. At the time, the select board, a resident had brought the topic up to the board reviewed it and concluded that they didn't feel like it was the municipality's place to put restrictions on private wells. But that information on that topic is in my report as well. So the primary goal of this is just to make folks know that there are resources available if they'd like to know more about their well and the drought conditions and what impact those have on water. Mr. Chair, please.
Just FYI, the Thursdays, the drought monitor comes out every Thursday. It references from Wednesday to Wednesday. The last one that came out last Thursday suggests we're right on the edge of abnormally dry and moderate drought. Classifications are no problem. Abnormally dry, moderate drought, severe drought, extreme drought. The area south and west of us is in moderate drought. There's a severe drought down around Hampton Beach in that area. The map, not exactly accurate on what we do. I think the concern is that as we do this in a prolonged way, that we begin to have problems with wells as the aquifer gets taken up by our deeper wells. We may have some rain and that covers the surface, does a nice job there, but it doesn't necessarily replenish the aquifer. So I think we need to be aware of this, at least at this point. I think we should encourage people to be careful with their water use. Washes out.
And how would we do that?
I think we can do that for our website, be my suggestion.
Absolutely. And like I said in my report, I would simply direct folks to the subject matter experts, being the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. And, you know, we can routinely share the resources that they make available. And it's, you know, I think they do a really good job.
Any other questions or concerns about water use? Yes, sir.
I think that's a good idea to turn around and ask. First, if people will try to conserve, we can get in enough trouble by making things mandatory, so I think we should just go with your suggestions. I think that's the best way to go. I had it written down here, but it's like everything else, you know, my targeted, so I can't find it.
Okay, yeah, and I think there's fewer people are watering their lawns at this point anyway, but hopefully we'll get some more rain. Select board duties on election day. Thank you. Connor filled us in a great deal on this, but we do need to, I think, have someone, one of us, please, here at all times, and especially around the end of the voting time for both the ballot session for the special town meeting, which is the 18th, but also when we get to the election on the 8th of November. will be important that we do that. We'll have a meeting on the 17th and we can work out some sort of schedule, I think.
For the next day. It would be helpful for
It'd be
perhaps
nice-
to do a
it'd be
schedule
nice if we
sooner
could do
than
it
that.
before, we have volunteers.
And that doesn't have to be resolved at a public meeting. The right to know law allows the select board to schedule via contemporaneous communication through email. So, you know, you might suggest that the chair send out an organizing email asking members when they could be available, sign up for shifts type of thing.
That sounds fair.
That sounds good.
Yeah, there's, you gave very detailed information. All right, moving right along, old business. We talked about there's a letter here referencing the building permit on McDaniel Shore Drive, private road, requesting clarification of on a couple of the items when we made the decision to issue that permit. Everyone had a chance to read this letter, but
Yes.
concerns.
So really just looking for the select board to make it clear to staff what the intended decisions were. So ultimately, you know, the road agent for McDaniel Shore Drive brought these concerns to our attention. He's been working with Mr. Mosier. Staff won't finalize the sign off until Mr. Mosier is ready for a certificate of occupancy. And so, but if there is uncertainty, which I think the road agent makes a few good points based on what has happened, primarily relative to the annual road grading. So apparently there's multiple categories of their road grading bill, one for the actual grading, one for material, one for trucking, and I think there's the three categories. Mr. Mosier paid just one of the three categories. And the road agent from McDaniel Shore Drive watched the meeting and was under the impression that the select board's expectation was to pay the entire annual bill. I know $5,000 to $6,000 was talked about. Just the grading part was $2,200. And so some clarity from the select board on the intent of that decision from April. And then also the culvert.
The insulation.
The road agent isn't interested in having a culvert purchased that they don't have money to install. It's unclear if he's of the opinion that they'll have money to install it, if Mr. Mosier pays for the full bill or not, but some clarity from the select board would be beneficial. You'll remember this was in the infancy of the new policy, and the planning board and select board really stumbled through this process. There were long conversations at both meetings. I've gone back and watched the entire select board discussion of this. And from that review, it's certainly my understanding that the select board expected the full bill to be paid by Mr. Mosier. But that isn't abundantly clear in the language of the motion, which we drafted live during that meeting.
Which was a very long and late meeting.
Right.
Especially when this came up.
So it's not a surprise that clarity is needed, but it's the role of the select board to provide that clarity, if you will.
Yeah, it's my impression that, it was my sense at least, that we expected the culvert to be installed according to their selecting a place and not just buying a pipe, but to also put it in place as well as paying the whole cost of grading the road.
That's what I
My
thought.
sense, that was my sense of it. Anyone have another sense of that? Or,
No, I haven't, I'm sitting here on this.
Yeah.
Great.
I think that's the sense of that, and I think we should.
Does it require,
Is it Yeah, that's perhaps we ought to, in writing. Send Mr. Hotchcraft, I apologize if I mispronounced the name.
I think I think, making clear the select board's intention, is the number one priority, and then communicating that to the property owner, Mr. Mosier, and then certainly any interested parties to include the road association. So I might suggest that the select board make a motion clarifying the decision from the bill. And so, again, the two issues at stake are the road grading. So we know what the full bill is now, because it was in the road agent's letter. And so you could assign that dollar value to it, or you could, clarify by saying all components of road grading to include the material, trucking fees. I think that would be a good way to clarify that. And then the original motion for the culvert said, purchase a culvert to be replaced at the discretion of the road association. What I'm hearing is that the select board intended that discretion just be that they tell you which one to replace.
Right.
But I think that clarifying that the property owner is responsible for purchasing and replacing a culvert at the advice of the road association.
Okay, I need that motion.
Yes, I want to make it, but
I'm going to let you.
I think it would be wise not to put the dollar
dollar.
amount.
okay, well, then I could just reiterate that the motion made by Selectman Sakosha stated that the applicant must pick up the 2021 spring Bell and Flynn bill that the association normally does in addition to buying and replacing a culvert. Which one to replace is at the discretion of the road association. Repair damage to the road if there is any during construction, and have evidence of a maintenance agreement. All these include grading and grading materials. That's sufficient.
I think that should cover it. Wait a second.
I'll second.
Discussion.
I would like to ask that they not exceed the original intent of 10% on the cost to the applicant.
I think-
That's open for discussion. It's not to change the motion. I'm just sitting here because, we've had several letters and talking about it. But still, if somebody wants to come here, who really, which is almost a private town, turn around and to live and raise their family, I mean, it's a wonderful opportunity. And I think 10% is a small fee to pay. But I would like to see that it doesn't exceed that for the applicant who's seeking to do that. That's all. That's why I'm bringing it up.
Based on the numbers that were discussed, I don't expect that we'll be bumping up into that. But if you feel more comfortable, you could ask
Why don't you just amend,
the motion to be amended, not to exceed.
why don't you amend the motion to say the cost not to exceed 10% of the cost of construction?
Okay, I can amend the motion I just made to not, for the cost of all of that, not to exceed the 10% of the construction.
Thank you.
Do you amend that second?
Second, yeah.
Favor of the amendment? Aye.
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 All those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Which brings us to discussion of the Class 6 private road building policy. Mr. Dwayne.
I don't have a question. Usually I do.
I previously sent us a letter, I think it was incorporated and was again reiterated. For discussion. If I may, I can move on. Obviously, we've had difficulties implementing this and putting it in place, although the last two requests we have seem to fit very nicely into this requirement. Or been in compliance with the policy. I think it probably does need to be looked at again would be useful to have input, but I think we need to give it some time, current policy, give it some time to see how it works out, once we've kind of established amongst ourselves how we institute that. That's my personal opinion, that we might want to revisit this, when we, I think, next, perhaps with the next board, coming in April of 2023.
Do you mean have a trial period until next fall?
That's correct.
Yeah, I would go along with that.
Please.
I would go along with the original intent, because I do feel like we could use some more time. And I think I personally stumbled in the beginning with trying to figure this out. Where I need help is when the geography of the land just doesn't really allow for that expansion of the road. And we had one come before us. And that was just difficult to figure out how to do it. It was a paved road. It was very narrow. To widen it was going to involve numbers of neighbors who are not willing to give up some of their land to do it. And that could certainly benefit from some additional brainstorming in those kinds of situations.
I would go back to what I said before, and I think that we really need to have a working group and work it out as a group in the session like we did with the strategic planning. And bring other people to that discussion from planning and outside entities too.
Yeah, I think we did not consider how much the people who construct these things and are involved with that, and that'll be part of that process. But again, I think we have to give this a little time to work. But we can revisit it whenever you think. I think we ought to give it a little time to work with what we have now.
This was originally been in place for close to 12 years, not this particular one, but the Class 6 agreement was there for 12 years, I know for sure. And I think that I will say this, when I first brought it up with the help of so many other people, we failed to have a definite answer, so it made it very difficult for our department heads to do it. And I think that we should allow this to work, and then come sometime in April, start with a new committee, and everybody sit together. But it gives us the time to have actual findings and actual people that we can turn around and do like Roberts has suggested, turn around and have the committee also. And that would give it all, it would be fair for both sides. And then we could, the new board would be able to be select on services and accomplishments of the individual they put on the committee. So you would have a committee that would be ready to start. You should be able to get it done in a couple hours.
One thing I like about your proposal is it involves all the select board being
Yeah.
part of the conversation as opposed to one person representative.
Well,
from the
that's
select.
what I'm saying, is combine what Rob was saying, the chair was saying, put it all together and then select the people that you want to have come in that have the knowledge and the commitment and the expertise to do it. Meet with the board and sit down, and you should, like you said, for the last time we sat down for that other meeting that we had, open it up to the public can be there, but it's a business meeting. And we go through it, everybody has to say that was invited to me. And in 2 hours, you should be able to see what the flaws are and look at the changes. But also, I would just say, we have to remember, we're doing this for the safety of our employees and for the individual living on the road, because we have been laxed. There are towns that don't allow buildings on Class 6. And they just, so here's the road, that's it. So, but I think between the chair and Rob's idea, I think that's a fantastic way of doing it. I'm trying to convince you.
Yeah. I think as
But
long as the
I'm
whole,
also, I'm also
board
looking
is
for the
involved.
hits. I'm also looking for the hits before we do that.
And we would include in that all the stakeholders. I think previously we've not included all the stakeholders in the deliberations. Having said that, I think we have a policy now has begun to work. We've begun to work it through. I think we ought to give it a little time to work rather than change every 3 or 4 months.
could we put it on our agenda? So we actually do it. Because that would be 6 months from now. I can see that. As other more pressing things come before us, that might not happen.
I suspect the home builders will hold our feet to the fire on this very seriously. So I don't think it will fall off of our radar.
Is the proposal to start the process in April, once a new board is convened? I know what you mean. I know what you're saying about, one session could be really productive. I suspect that it won't be a one-step process, mostly because any requirements that the board is interested in imposing have very intricate legal implications to make sure where the authority stops and starts. And so a couple of the high points that, we had to flesh out the last time the select board updated this policy. One was, how much can we have our department heads be doing on Class 6 private roads? So the New Hampshire Constitution says you can't spend public funds for a private purpose. That is why that the fire chief has to declare an emergency just to send a highway truck down so an ambulance can get out of a private road in the winter that is properly maintained. So there are very strict prohibition on spending public funds for a private purpose. And so another thing at issue is the town can't be any part of the dollars and cents of it. So the town can make requirements, the town can set benchmark for their requirements, but the town can't be paid and save that money up to do work on the road, which would make logical sense. We also wouldn't be able to, the road association save that money. The work has to be done so that we have a metric that we can use to, authorize the issuance of the certificate of occupancy. And so it's very nuanced. And I guess the reason I say that is because there's a lot of reasonable ideas to accomplish the goal of improvements to Class 6 and private roads that just aren't possible in the regulatory framework of state law. And so a work session on whatever schedule the board wants could be really productive to get a lot of things on the list of, hey, consider this, consider that, consider this. But I suspect it would require the review of an attorney to say, this is possible, this is not possible, et cetera. I'll say, as I said, when we went through the process the last time, you see this done in communities across the state in a variety of different ways. I would say that I haven't seen a community that tries as hard as Barrington to accomplish the goal of making improvements to the roads. Most is either all or nothing. You either make the road meet these standards, or you don't get a permit, or you don't get a permit at all. The distance between black and white is where Barrington has lived with the old policy and with this one. And that gray area is very complex because you're trying to balance property rights with emergency access. And there isn't a gold standard in doing that in the state. I've shared our policy with countless communities that have an interest to try to do the same thing. I tell them all the same thing. Stick with what you're doing. Either give everybody permits or make them do, or either don't give anybody permits or make them do one thing that and no gray area, because it's a complicated process. But both of those have drawbacks. So point saying all that is plan on more of a process than just one meeting. And it sounds like you're trying to decide when to start the process. Sounds like there's unanimous agreement that a process would be valuable. But identifying when to start that process, stop that process.
That would be my sense too, and I suspect we would like this, the whole new board be involved, so that we have a little longevity in the scheme. Fine. Any other discussion?
Were you gonna make a specific decision on that, or just discussion? And I know Mrs. Capiello had mentioned putting a date on the books, to work towards, putting on the agenda now. So you could say,
You'd say April.
And so label it as like a work session or something, so there's a dedicated, hour or something of a meeting to.
maybe the
Discuss
first
that.
meeting in April is a work session exclusively focused on Class 6 private road. And as we lead up to that, we can design it a little bit better. But the new board will have a meeting in March, or meeting or two, an organizing meeting. And then, the first meeting in April, if that the schedule is like 40 months, could be exclusively focused on.
In the meantime, could we put up perhaps requests for comments from citizens and groups again? I mean, thank you for the comments you shared and well taken. Could we perhaps, cast a broader net, just kind of get to see what other feedback might show up to, just to kind of give us more fodder?
I think that's a good idea, but I would also suggest that we actually have some of those stakeholders. And I think you've offered, we have people come to this and be part of the discussion.
For sure, for sure.
But having other comments would be of great use. We may be able to identify people that we have not identified as stakeholders at this point.
To your point, that would give us an opportunity if interested parties come forward with suggestions, like I know Unified Builders did.
Great.
That would, in advance of a workshop, we could use that time. If the select board affords it to us, we could use that time to vet proposals or proposed approaches to accomplish the goal. But those proposals could come from the select board, the planning board. I mean, we could make a blanket call for those proposals.
Right.
And at the select board's direction, I'd be glad to do that.
I think that's a good
I
idea.
would like to keep the conversation going. I mean, I understand waiting to another board, but I don't like pushing the ball down that far. And so I think that if we can keep the conversation active, it would be wise.
Can you do that, please?
I can absolutely do that. And historically, the winter, there aren't a lot of applications through the winter months. The select board last year paused hearings for a few months while the current policy was produced. And so we can work on it through the winter, it sounds like.
I think that's a good compromise position. Okay, we move on to discussion of the wage study. I wanted laid out, I think, the parameters that were used. I think we've had a chance to look at this. Again, 9%, excuse me, about 9% across the board.
Thank you for coming.
Take care.
And then there's the actual proposals. Do we then need to discuss the steps? Where we place people in these steps, in the steps, in the grades, rather.
Is the cost of living included in that? Or was this above the cost of living?
It's really in place of.
Okay.
Probably the best way to look at it. So I was challenged with the task of preparing an initial budget request before these recommendations were decided.
Okay.
It's just a timing thing. They weren't ready when I needed to file them. So what I did is I prepared a budget, which pretends that the wage study doesn't exist.
Mhm.
It says if we were going to do something, if we we're going to keep the pay plan and do a cost of living, we would do this. I think the select board has communicated an intention to look at the wage study and make changes. What implementing the wage study would do is create an entirely new pay plan. And there'd be new placement on the pay plan in place of everything else. That would be the change that happens the first pay period in April versus a step in a cost of living, which would happen if we weren't doing the wage study. So the money is in the budget to implement the recommendations of the wage study. So, if the select board were going to fully implement these recommendations, that would change what the current budget request is. And so the select board can see the proposal as a whole that has the money in it to do what the consultant recommended.
So is the current one including the 9 plus the 2.5, or?
So a couple of things. No,
No.
it's just the 9.
Just the 9,
The
okay.
9's an average, and that's essentially important, because with averages, there are numbers bigger than 9, and numbers smaller than 9. The select board, the last time through the process, and historically, the select board has painted with a broad brush stroke as it relates to employee wages. And so the select board isn't sitting at public meetings saying employee X should be at Y step on grade Z.
Yep.
And so what I have done is, in working with the consultant, is summarize the information that says, so this, probably the page we're looking at when the conversation about magnifying glasses came up, shows where each position is currently graded and what the minimum and maximum is for that position under the existing pay plan. What the new grade is proposed to be and what the minimum and maximum is for that position. And then what the percentage change is for the minimum and maximum for each position. So we're not talking about any individual employee or any individual position on a pay plan. So overall, this new pay plan, based on the 15 comparable communities in the 60th percentile, is an average of 9% higher on the starting wage rate and an average of 8.2% higher on the maximum wage rate. And so that average of 9% is, when it comes time to place incumbent employees on the new pay plan, that average of 9% is, gives us some direction, gives the consultants some direction. What they look at is they look at when we're talking about placing incumbent employees on the new pay plan, they look at two things. They look at that average and they look at by position, how much has this position moved? So, without, getting into too much of the nitty gritty, a non-certified firefighter, the minimum and maximum increased about 12%. So the consultant is looking at the average of 9% and the the position classification of 12%. And when they're picking, looking at this step versus this step, maybe this step is 7.5% and this step is 10%. They're going to say, okay, 10% falls in that range. That seems to be appropriate. So that's how employees are recommended for a specific step using those two metrics. And then there's also a review of compression. Sometimes when you have two employees in the same position, which truth be told, we don't have a lot of that. We're a relatively small organization. And you have the incumbent with fewer years of service move up to step 1. And step 1 is, maybe step 1's a 15% increase. And the incumbent is looking at, maybe a 9% increase. But now maybe they're step 1 and step 2. That is called compression. And you try to avoid that by, so that you're not devaluing the incumbent with longer years of service. So that's another layer. So maybe that incumbent is a step 3. And ends up with a higher percentage increase. And so that's how the placement of individual employees on steps is proposed. And
except for the first two. And there are four that actually jump two, or one of them jumps up three grades, which are the bigger numbers, I think. And I don't have it. Makes sense to me.
To that point, the grades in the existing pay plan and the grades in the new pay plan aren't apples and apples. So looking and saying that, somebody's going from a grade 6 to a grade 7, it could be that somebody that's going from a grade 5 and staying in a grade 5 experiences a higher wage rate increase because those new grades aren't the same minimum and maximum. So we ran into this last time we changed the pay plan, and employees, my supervisor went up two grades and I only went up 1 grade. Well, you experience a 10% increase and your supervisor experienced a 7% increase. The grade number is less impactful.
Do we need to vote to adopt this pay plan at this point?
I would recommend that you wait until the 17th. This was on the agenda for discussion. Don't need a decision right now. Wanted to get information in front of you. I expect by the 17th to have the full report from MRI, which kind of goes into the whole process. But this is an opportunity to ask for any additional information to be able to make a decision on the 17th. The budget committee is hopeful that the select board will make a decision on the meeting, at the meeting on the 17th, so that we know where wages are from a budget perspective.
That was one of the reasons why I asked about the social security and the other information, but as we got something else to compare it with and go from there, make it that way.
Part of this is more than inflationary rate, because these increases reflect the responsibilities of the job and comparing them to the area.
Yeah, but we're still, yes, I understand exactly what you're saying, and I agree with you 100%. But at the same time, if they're gonna turn around and have a wage increase and then we're trying to make parity, where are we? We're gonna be pushing ourselves back if one makes a recommendation to do more than the other. So that's why I was asking for the government proposals.
My impression is that these increases aren't so much related to inflation, but related to what other municipalities are paying, right? So it's,
So they correct for both, right? So anytime you're changing the pay plan, the wage matrix, you are resetting the clock for something like cost of living. So what you'll see in the report is the consultant asked for the fiscal year 2023 wage rates for positions. A lot of communities are a fiscal year July to June. And so making sure that we have accurate data corrects for what the prevailing wage is for each position at that snapshot in time. So that resets the inflation, the cost of living from that number. So that next year, we need to make sure that we correct for cost of living, correct the pay plan for cost of living. But doing a comprehensive new pay plan is intended to implement any impacts of inflation on wages.
Yeah.
So now I'm understanding your question you asked earlier better.
it's also assuming that the comparisons to other municipalities, that those other municipalities are current with having up-to-date compensation based on the inflation and cost of living for their employees.
You're exactly correct. And I think that's one of the reasons that the consultant recommended, and at direction from the select board, casting a wider net of 15 communities. We did 8 the last time.
Mhm.
And so casting a wider net and also targeting not the 50th percentile, but the 60th percentile to make sure that we're there. One of the things that when we did the comprehensive compensation study, one of the recommendations in the report was that the select board make a commitment to an objective cost of living evaluation every year. Different than merit, a separate conversation. I proposed, at the select board's direction, I proposed a cost of living policy with methodology. I have a copy of that in chapter 3 of the budget binder. The select board never ends up instituting it, deferring to having a conversation about cost of living along with other wage increases. What MRI recommends is that the select board decide what metrics they're going to look at for cost of living, do a formula, and every year there's no question about what the cost of living is going to be. If these metrics say this, then you divide that by that, and that's what your cost, that's what you budget for a cost of living. And what they say is it should be objective like that, simply because inflation is objective. Inflation goes up, inflation goes down. And the methodology that I proposed corrects for when the cost of living would go down by using a combination of CPI data and social security. And so I will again encourage, when we look to 2024, the select board to make a commitment to an objective cost of living methodology, policy, whatever you want to call it, to make sure that this pay plan stays current with inflation.
Any other questions? Any further discussion?
So there'll be more information for the 17th, and if you have questions in the meantime, send them to me, I'll incorporate them in the materials. And I hole punch these, so you can put them in your budget binder. Anything you see in your materials that have holes in them are destined for the budget binder. I shouldn't say that I hole punch these, the printer hole punched them for me.
Printer.
Marvels of modern technology.
They are,
Yes.
okay, marvelous. Energy Committee, oh, sorry.
No, just saying, I was gonna be on board for this week.
All right,
It's 8:30 here, George. How come you?
yeah,
Oh, wait, no, you went to the doctor today. And
all right, here goes
Okay,
down,
yeah.
down one more time. Pass it on. Okay,
Thanks.
Energy Committee, speaking of energy. Thank you, Connor, they should be.
I would have preferred the notes, but that's.
yeah, hold on.
Okay, thanks for taking.
Yep.
Okay, so we've approved several members of the Energy Committee. We have one other person who's asked to be part of the Energy Committee.
Mhm.
And so it's two concerns are the charge and the conflict of interest parameters.
Agreed initiative.
Well, Mr. Saunders, I've raised an issue.
No, I understand.
Personally, I'd prefer to keep that in. I would disagree with Mr. Saunders. As I have before.
Oh, haven't we on this? We have.
I mean, he knows that, but I would disagree that I think we have more than enough CO2 for all our plants and animals. We're now getting excessive CO2, which does affect climate change. I've realized that there are some people who disagree with that, but I think the large majority of scientific community believes that that is the case. So I would suggest we leave that phrase in there.
Probably come back around anyway.
And to his point, as I shared with the select board, I had intended through this process that the first objective of the newly formed energy committee would be to review the charge and recommend changes to the select board. I think anytime you have a group of citizen volunteers, it's important to make sure that they're a part of a process that is of interest to them. So giving them an opportunity, I think, is a great suggestion, and that was an intended step of the process.
Yeah.
Yes, that's.
I looked through all of this and the thing that I see that's missing, that needs to be in there, we put in here to be with the conservation committee, planning board, what have you. But in no, in the area doesn't say that it is a subcommittee, from the select board. And that they, will be reporting back to.
Sometimes when it does.
It says it's an
Very good.
advisory subcommittee down here in number 8,
Number.
Okay.
and the select board will have oversight and approval authority.
Stay corrected again, I think, I'm glad it was there, okay. So you can pick it all up.
Again, I think the committee will probably add to this and whatnot, but in the list of A through H, I think also just reaching out to our citizens of Barrington and letting them know what they can do in their own homes and stuff to save energy, and having resources on the website and things like that, I think would be, it's a lot more infrastructure in people's homes than what we have just here in town.
Yeah, the committee has to realize that if they're gonna add to the study, it does have to go with the approval from, all of us sitting here,
Right.
which would be very helpful, keep us abreast of what they're doing.
But
And-
as Mr. Saunders said, that there is the master plan update. So they'll be coming out with a report also. So working with them, because that's just
Mhm,
another way to
mhm.
communicate importance of conservation.
The other topic on that, Mr. Chair, was the conflict of interest. I had proposed some simple language. Setting some parameters which balances the value and experience of community members and industry professionals in the real or perceived conflict of interest. And would say that presenters and members of the committee should be open and transparent about any desire or potential for financial gain related to town energy projects. Additionally, should the town develop and advertise an RFP or similar, anyone with a real or perceived conflict should recuse themselves from that phase of the process. That's simply a proposal, but the last time the town tried to do an energy project, it kind of dissolved late in the process, and a real or perceived, I don't know, I wasn't here, conflict of interest was part of that, the part of what dissolved what was being proposed. So I think making sure that all the cards are on the table from the front is cheap insurance. And so that's the language that I would propose, but it's up to the select board.
That language would also incorporate that part where they think over $800, they have to turn around and declare, so it takes care of everything all at once.
Oh,
Because-
could you explain that?
But there's, what it is if anybody that feels that there has a conflict of interest, anything less than $800, they're safe if they're gonna bid for it or what have you. But anything that says they're over $800, then they have to declare themselves.
Okay.
So it's all covered, that exactly what he was saying, only in different ways.
Okay.
There's a case law that defines a
Yeah.
financial gain, the level of financial gain at $800. It's not bulletproof case law,
No.
but it's the widely used metric of
Okay, I just hadn't heard the 800.
very nice.
Sounds arbitrary.
Like I said, I don't think the case law.
It just came up, so that's why you heard about it.
Oh, my case had $800. Yeah. So we need, motion to adopt the charge as amended or not amended. We want to add, did you want to add an amendment? Did you want to add an I to that paragraph 3?
I mean, I could wait for the board to, I'm gonna be liaison to the board, so I can talk to them about it and see what they get their input.
That sounds fair.
So we're not gonna include DA's recommendation, just gonna wait, have Rob do it?
Well, the recommendation, yeah.
Okay, that's fine, I understand.
Okay.
And I didn't propose to include that conflict of interest language in the charge. You're certainly welcome to, but just setting that as the minimum threshold as the select board to be communicated to the members. And I wrote the motion that would include that.
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we accept this language. I don't have any additions to it.
Second.
Okay. I would amend that to include the paragraph on conflict of interest as part of the charge.
I like that too. So let's do that. I would,
Okay, I agree.
Okay.
That's the second.
I would add can I just add that amendment to the motion? I would make a motion to adopt the Energy Committee charge and conflict of interest parameters that are outlined in section D, number 4.
Okay?
Aye.
second,
All in favor?
aye.
Aye. Very good. Okay, petition special town meeting. Let me read. I have to read this whole thing. It's pretty much published. It's public, and it was included in the agenda here just to make sure everyone understood. There is the ballot session for the special town meeting held on the 18th here in the we have here in this building and stuff, from, I'll get it out eventually, 8 to 7 p.m. in this building on Tuesday, the 18th of October. And I'll send out a scheduling email to see when we can all make a shift here to be sure that there's a select board member here at all times. Is there any discussion of that?
It's well put together. Covers everything.
Okay, new business, let's have a see. All right. Landry, Nippo Lake Conservation Acquisition Property Interest. I think you all have memorandum from the Barrington Conservation Commission. Mr. Grossman is here, presumably representing them. So if you have a question.
Accompanied by Mr. Hyde from South.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you there. I apologize. Oh, no problem. I'm just in line here. I apologize.
Yep. The purpose of this agenda item is kind of twofold. We've talked about this project at public meetings before, shared the very positive news with the community. This is a tremendously valuable piece of property that the property owners have chosen and brokered a deal to conserve. The Conservation Commission has been supportive and recently at a meeting voted to be financially supportive of the project. So they have voted to appropriate $100,000 from the Conservation Fund for this project. You see a budget in your memo. It's the second to last page, first out of the second to last page. To see the list of expenses and current revenue level for the project. It's a $1.5 million conservation project. So the Conservation Commission has appropriated $100,000. RSA 36-A:4-A requires that if the Conservation Commission can spend their own money from the Conservation Fund, but if they're acquiring a property interest, so whether it's the full-blown conservation easement, or in this case, a proposed executory interest in the conservation easement, which Mr. Hyde is much more qualified than me to describe all the nuances, but similar to what the town holds with the Stonehouse Forest, then the select board is required to approve that. The Conservation Commission cannot autonomously acquire property interest on behalf of the town. So what the select board would be doing in the proposed motion is ratifying the decision of the Conservation Commission and agreeing to accept the property interest that would come along with the $100,000 contribution to the project. And so it's trying to think, it was the Leighton Forest a few months ago, 6-8 months ago, that the Conservation Commission donated $10,000. That did not come with any property interest. And the Conservation Commission asked that the select board ratify that decision as a sign of good faith and to maintain cooperation. But that decision was non-binding. The select board couldn't stop that. It's the Conservation Commission's money or under their authority. This would be a impactful decision of the select board. You're either approving it or you're not. And as you said, the Conservation Commission chair and representative from the Land Conservation Director for Southeast Land Trust is here to add any details and answer any questions if you have them.
So, questions?
So I'll ask you, so the executive function is essentially that if SELT goes under, the town of Barrington gets the property to
That's
manage?
Perfectly, it's the
I mean, if you
option
would.
of the town.
Oh,
I'm sorry. Yeah,
just for the audio.
Yeah,
Thank you.
no problem.
For your prime time.
New building, I
Oh,
don't know the routine. So yeah, an executive, you basically have it correct. So the way an executory interest works is if the.
Could you give your name just?
Yeah, sure, Dwayne Hyde, Land Conservation Director
Thank
for
you.
the Southeast Land Trust.
Thank you.
So if the Southeast Land Trust fails to exist,
Mhm.
the town will have the option to take it's in the Southeast Land Trust interest and the conservation easement.
So essentially manage it.
Yeah.
In the same way you're doing it. And there would be parameters that we would need to do that in the same way that you are.
Yes,
managing
the
it.
easement exists in perpetuity as written.
Okay.
Easements can be amended, but it gets a little bit complicated, but it's very uncommon to amend an easement.
Thank you.
Anyone need further questions?
It's a nice piece of property.
And it's a beautiful lake and they had no blooms this year.
Yeah.
That's great.
And not to mince words, it saves the pond.
It's 25% of the watershed of the lake. It's pretty impressive. It's a beautiful property. I'd be happy to, been having leading hikes out there, and if the Board of Selectmen and others would like to go out there, I'm happy to take you out.
No, that'd
Just
be
out
fun.
of curiosity, and I'm not sure. It occurred to me, if I could carry a canoe in there, could I canoe on Nippo Lake? Off that property?
Yeah, the easement will guarantee public access, pedestrian access on the property, hunting and fishing. So if it's almost a mile hike
Yeah,
on the
Oh,
property.
so you have to carry your canoe for a mile?
I got calculating that.
Yeah,
I wasn't gonna do it, but if I wanted to.
Yeah, exactly.
If
Will
that-
there be-
If that's too long a walk, we know some private land. More than happy to accommodate.
I appreciate that. So,
You come down, who do you get to it?
yeah, very place, but I was just curious.
Yeah.
The other question is, are they planning any development of trails and that sort of thing in there? Or is this
There's
gonna
a
be
nice-
less-
So there's a nice woods road that exists going into the property. So that's pretty much gonna be the main public access point into there, into the property. We are considering a small parking area right now. You have to park on the shoulder, but where the gate is to go into the property, there's a little landing area where per the easement, we'll have the right, Southeast Land Trust will have the right to be able to put in a parking lot.
And that's on 202?
Yes.
Is it gonna have a time frame to it?
No, not yet. We've got to, that's gonna require some work to figure out whether it can work. There's a wetland there and a stream crossing, so we've got to do some more evaluation to see if that will work.
Because I am aware, as you are also, that over the years, it was put in some of the easements or to have the trails put on and then a 24-month period in a parking area. And we've had difficulty along with you in order to get the individuals to do it and the equipment to get in and what have you. And, if we're gonna put this kind of money into this piece of property, I would really like to see a time frame for the possibility of some other trails through this and also for the parking area in two spots. Because if you go out here, over here on 9, that's a beautiful piece of property there, but the parking area is full and it's just hard for the cars to get by. And you have another piece of property over there. And it escapes me where it is, but parking and having trails is really something that's necessary. And I would like to see the easement have it in it and also to have a 24-month, 36-month time frame as to when it would be done, because it would be helpful to do it. Now, what percentage does this put us at? Right now, we're roughly 47% in town with the wetlands and with the conservation easements. How much more is this going to raise us up to having little, if any, little to no tax on the property?
So the metric you're citing comes from the MS1.
Yeah.
Which is a review of the value of town, and that summarizes, believe the category is current use land and maybe separately conservation land and conservation land. And so when folks talk that 50% of Barrington is open space, it's where that metric comes from. I can review the most recent MS1, let you know what the current number is. Your second point about impact of conservation on property taxes. The immediate impact is negligible because this property is under current use values, which are pennies. It could be argued that future potential for property tax base is reduced by permanently conserving property because there's no development potential, which would add to the property value. Mr. Hyde would probably be more qualified to make this argument, but the counterpoint often made to that point is that the residential development of property doesn't necessarily create a surplus of property tax value because of the demands on things like schools and public safety and such. So there's a financial argument to be made that leaving property vacant, even if you're not deriving property tax value from it, is more financially beneficial to a community because it also doesn't have ongoing costs.
That's
So
the argument. Yeah.
there's no objective, this is what's gonna happen, but those are the two sides of subjective arguments.
Yeah, I've heard them all before, but I was just curious as to what percentage it would put us at, and if you go with the MS, that would be nice.
It's, we're 48 square miles, and this is how many acres?
This is 163.
I would expect a negligible difference from
Well, I
the
don't,
project.
but.
But the numbers already reflected is my point. George.
But I really would like to see, when you do the easement, some type of timeline in the easement. I mean, there are so many people in town that use all of these areas. And well, today at 10:30 in the morning, when I went up the road after going to a visit, it was full. I mean,
Which one are you talking about? The Goodwood? The Goodwood?
right there, right across from Mrs. Litchfield's house. I mean, it was full, and I think it's the best thing to have, but I would like to see it in the easement saying that they provide a parking lot and what have you, so we can do it. I mean,
Yeah, it's a little
and on the other side, I'm gonna finish this, we have had wonderful workings with you, and it's worked out beautifully, and I would just like to continue to see that it's in here so that everybody can really get to use the joy of it. And, we know the selective cutting sometimes along to help prevent the forest fires and what have you. I know that, but I would just like to be able to see that people can use it.
Yeah, the point, the Stonehouse Forest where we've installed several parking areas and.
Beautiful area.
And well used and loved place. We own and manage that Southeast Land Trust. This is a private property. This will remain private property, subject to a conservation easement. So having that, having a landowner, we have to work with them on putting a parking area in. So it's a little bit of a different situation in that we don't own and manage the land and don't fully control the property. So that's where, we need to work with the landowner. Our goal and hope is to be able to put in a parking area there, but I just can't give you that guarantee.
Okay, because you understand, I'm just trying to get it so the people younger than me can really have a place to work, work out, go through the woods, take the children with them. It's just, it's a fantastic idea, but that's why I asked it that way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I want
Thank you,
to,
Mr. Chairman.
I'd like to, if you will throw in my 2 cents about the property value issue.
Ken, could you give your name for the?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm Ken Grossman.
Thank
I
you.
live on Scruton Pond Road. I'm chair of the Conservation Commission. When I said earlier, I alluded to this project saving Nippo Pond. What I was alluding to, and you may have heard about this, is that Nippo Pond had been subject to terrible algae blooms.
Yeah.
And if a pond degrades to a certain point, the property values of the people who do have residents around it degrades. And so you lose that. And in general, if we don't save special places in Barrington, then it all over Barrington. Barrington no longer becomes known as a place with, beautiful places. So,
Because what you alluded to, I was there at that meeting and some of the residents that are on that brought up on it and how it's almost dying. I remember that, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and they have a
that's-
very aggressive Nipple Pond Lake Association. I mean, they
Yes, they
raised
do.
enough money to
Yeah.
do the alum treatment on that lake.
Yeah, that was the best thing they could ever done.
Yeah.
So
and-
that's the reason why I'm just so interested in making sure that it's there so people can
Oh.
enjoy it. That's the whole,
Listen,
you know,
I think I might be older than you, and I still like to walk
well,
around.
that'd be a bet and a half, wouldn't
That's all beat, that's okay.
it?
Yeah. Very good. Yeah, it's
Thank you, Tim.
cheaper to grow trees than it is to grow houses.
So are we ready for a motion?
Yes.
You wanna make it?
Sure, I'll make a motion that we support the Conservation Commission's allocation of 100,000 to CELT. With the town having the executory interest.
And authorize town administrator to sign all accompanying documents. That's your pleasure.
It is mine.
Yes,
Please do.
so moved.
It's
So moved, yeah.
a little bit easier for somebody that's, here 95 to be able to do that.
Yes.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And Mr. Hyde, correct me if I'm wrong, but as an executory interest holder, the select board will later in this process be asked to ratify the conservation easement.
Correct.
Okay, so this will be back before you and maybe at that time or at your option, we could give Mr. Hyde and Sel an opportunity to make a brief presentation about the project that we could snip down and share with the community just to make sure folks are aware of it. There's going to be a little bit of time between now and then.
Yes, we're not scheduled to close, and earliest we'll close is August of next year. And the latest December of next year. So we've got time, and I'd like to work with you to try to schedule something for anyone that wants to get out
That'd be
there
fun.
and can see the property.
Cool.
Yes.
So we'll do some
just help
pomp and
preserve
circumstance.
my morning swimming place on some days.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Mountain Road Conservation Subdivision Open Space Ownership Discussion.
Is there anyone here representing?
Me,
Okay,
me.
Oh,
Me.
Okay, Nathan do.
Okay, so very simple. There's a proposed development of the old ductile pit off Malago Road. The current developer is proposing a conservation subdivision, which results in developed property and perpetual open space. This is pretty typical for recent developments. This 62 lot subdivision has 109 acres of open space, which the town took ownership to. Poland Road, and like up to more recent monuments, that was a conservation subdivision with open space that the town took ownership of. So that model has been exercised recently. One thing that's a little bit different about this one is the town has even a little bit more potential benefit from immediate ownership, because the developer has been open to sizing the drainage infrastructure to accept drainage from Malago Road. As you know, it's been an ongoing project of ours. And regardless of who owns this property, if it was the developed or who developed it, the town had started the process to get our water, essentially secure draining easements on this property. No surprise, water flows downhill. This is downhill of Malago Road. There's actually a mutual benefit here because by digging bigger detention ponds and rain gardens or whatever, the people with PE after their name decide is appropriate here, the developer will be able to use that additional material on the site to build houses. So it's close to a win-win, we'll say. Anyways, the developers also proposed to maintain a snowmobile trail through the property. Last week, I met with the Conservation Commission Chair, the developer, and other town staff to review the proposal of town ownership. Ultimately, it's a select board's decision on whether the open space is to be owned by the town. It's allowable under our zoning ordinance. And like I said, it's been exercised in the past. The chair has not yet met with the full Conservation Commission. But individually supports and expects that the Conservation Commission would also support conserving it this way, so we have a hand in the pot. And so not looking for a final decision from the select board, but essentially looking to take the temperature. This developer intends to bring a plan proposal, a full plan proposal to the planning board in November. And would like to indicate in the application what the ownership of the open space is planned to be. And so looking to take the temperature that way. The last thing that I'll note, which I believe I might have indicated in my report, is that I have asked the town's engineer to evaluate the property from a liability standpoint. There's some steep slopes which the developer intends to remediate, make more shallow and stabilize them. But I personally believe it would be prudent for the town to have a third party make a recommendation on the best condition for the exposed slopes of the expired pit to be left in, so that the town isn't exposed to undue liability. And so that process is kind of going on in the background anyways. Questions, comments, concerns from the board?
What's the depth of the pond?
The depth of the pond,
Yeah,
the detention pond?
over here, no, over here on the, where the sand was removed, what have you, is there any, standing water there? Is there any?
I went on that site walk with the planning board. I don't remember seeing any standing water.
Okay, that's all I could, because we had it once before. I haven't been on the site, that's why I asked
Mhm.
if there's anything on that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you see the Malago Brook, excuse me.
Right, I saw the
At
brook.
top, that's that dark line.
Am I reading these contour intervals right? It looks like they're building all the houses down the pit.
Yeah,
That's,
that's right.
And that's what.
that's the proposal.
He's gonna modify that.
Yeah.
Be interesting.
Are they gonna have a
Big amount
bond
of
on
land.
it? Is he gonna have a bond?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I mean,
No.
that's managed by the planning board and their bonding requirements.
Well, I just,
Yeah.
planning board is, we appointed him, and so I just asked him
Yeah.
a question.
The dotted areas are potential ponds. I'm not familiar with that particular.
I think those might be the steep areas.
So if you look here, the drainage infrastructure is intended to be on this part of the site. And so it's about,
So then it's gonna be the planning board's objective to ensure that the 5% grade is met.
it's 7%. and-
7th week, okay.
Yep,
Yeah,
and
there
the
was-
planning,
there was
this
discussion about
specific developer
There was discussion about
has
that.
been to the planning board for design review and indicated that he intends to ask for a waiver from the planning board to allow a small section with steeper than 7% grade, did he say 9%?
I don't remember.
But in this section here, I guess the problem is from an engineering perspective, when you have a steep slope, having a short section that's a little bit steeper is sometimes safer than extending the elevation longer and making a steeper drop off to the drainage ditch on the side, because it's all open drainage. I don't know, I'm not an engineer, but the planning board has supported waivers for short sections of the 7% grade requirement in the past based on that justification.
There was some concern expressed about the snowmobiles not being really clear where they're going to be redirected, but looking like they're going to get redirected kind of all along existing house lots on Malago, and there's going to be concern of noise and stuff for those homeowners.
I believe the current plan, so the existing snowmobile trail is shown on here in the dashed lines. One leg comes out down in this lot, and then the other leg kind of goes through where the houses are. What the developer's engineer has proposed, with consultation with Josh St. Hilaire, who I think is the current president of the Barrington.
Yeah, that's what I heard during the site visit.
To bring the trail behind the houses here along the river and then back out through the existing gravel pit entrance. And in conversation with the Conservation Commission chair, the developer has offered to establish a small parking area in that existing gravel pit entrance, maybe 4, 5, 6 cars. And people would be able to use that to take access to the open space down by the brook fishing, walking, whatever. And so I think maybe the proposed trail moved
Okay.
from what you saw initially.
How much damage is that going to cause us for conservation with the preparation of the trail prior to the snow being on the ground?
One of the great things, to just speak personally, in my opinion, one of the great things about a collaboration between the Snowmobile Club and the Conservation Commission is it's another set of hands to help with trail maintenance. And for winter usage, there's less impact to the environment, but they'll go out, manage water crossings, clear vegetation, things like that. And so I suspect if the snowmobile trail continues through there as proposed, that collaboration will continue.
All right. Well, we appointed them.
So I'm taking the temperature. The temperature is the select board opposed.
No.
Not opposed.
98.6.
Perfectly average. I would say COVID-free based on that, probably. Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
select board member reports. Mrs. Capiello.
Okay,
Beg your pardon, before we go any further, we still have
Thank you.
Oh,
Dennis.
section N.
The minutes.
That's
The
correct.
minutes, you have 2 minutes, correct.
right.
Can't get anything by me, Mr. I love it. Need not even deny it, stick on it.
Well,
Honestly,
because I have something else after Miss.
So, you want me to go ahead? I had on page, that would be page 3, a typo under the acceptance of the new town hall grant funds. It was seconded by select person Capiello Gibson. So it was one or the other. I don't know who.
Thank you, but we'll review the tape.
Okay. And then when I gave reports, I may have misspoke, but when it's the part about the self-made, that was a design discussion, so there was no proposal presented at that time. So those were just design suggestions. Thank you.
On the minutes, Mr. Bailey?
Thank you very much. On page 2. On page 2, I was talking about with Ms. Galliano, turned around and made note to her. There's no mention of the fact that the library went ahead and changed the wage staff and the motions they gave other people in the hiring. That's not in here, and I'd like to make sure that it gets put in there prior to having the budget effect.
Okay, we happy to put it in the text of it. We attached the letter that she presented, which had all those details. If you'd like us to addition.
Is there a letter that's in the minutes? Because
Yeah,
most people don't realize
that's okay.
that you do that.
Yeah.
And so when they go, nothing in minutes, nothing.
If it's the board's preference, to reiterate the high points from the letter in the text of the minutes, we can absolutely.
I would like that very much, just in case it comes up later on.
So that would be for the majority of the board to decide.
But
Any
if
objections?
it's missing,
any objections?
No, do you just use a hyperlink on the?
Yeah, we just attached her letter.
Yeah.
But what we would do, as Mr. Bailey's recommendation, just simply copy the points from the letter
Letter.
into the text of the minutes. That's easy enough to do. I mean, when the minutes gets a
Oh, I see that.
9 page,
there.
try to keep them brief, but I understand Mr. Bailey's point and happy to.
I very seldom go that deeper. If it goes past spelling, that's as far as I
I
go.
love it.
Yeah.
So, be looking for a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
Motion to approve
Second, as amended,
as amended.
second,
All in favor?
Aye.
aye.
Very good. Okay, now, select report, excuse me.
Okay, so our last planning board was primarily a work session. The planning board reviewed previous zoning amendments that didn't pass in 2022 and discussed which ones they should drop, which ones they might want to amend. And that's an ongoing process, and we'll continue that at our next meeting. we had a discussion, a really interesting discussion with Ken Grossman representing the Conservation Commission. He was asking the planning board and the Conservation Commission to look at a quantitative measure for looking at exemptions to buffers as plans are looked at, because right now it's sort of a qualitative or a more gestalt look at the impact of permits for construction and wetland buffers. So we'll hear more about that. The planning board asked for a scope of work proposal, which he is planning to put together. The town of Kingston has developed a very interesting, like, half-page metric about how they score wetland buffers to assess whether one could build in a buffer with really relatively no impact, or would even require a larger buffer. So more to come on that, and the planning board is going to increase their impact fee structure. An application will be $300. There'll still be a few additional charges. L-chip is 25, and there will be some postage charges per abutter.
And those will come to the select board for ratification, just like they did with the zoning board.
And with subdivisions. So that was the main. That meeting.
Mr. Gibson, sorry.
September 22nd, Conservation Commission reviewed the Guptill site as well as the Thibodeau site. And those concerns, any concerns that came up, Ken was going to present to the planning board. They voted to approve of the town taking the executory interest in the Landry easement. They discussed the capital improvements requests that were submitted previously, and that was about it.
Mr. Bailey. Okay. My report, we have the ABC committee report from last Tuesday. ABC will not meet this tomorrow, but we'll meet on the 11th or whatever that next Tuesday is. The transfer station committee did not have their scheduled meeting, rescheduled meeting soon. We don't have a date yet on that. And then school board meets tomorrow. I missed the last meeting for personal reasons, but I'll be at the school board tomorrow. Any other questions? Good. Okay, it's time for the second public comment session. If you've made one public comment, you're limited to one public comment. The rule is your one public comment. Sorry about that. Yes, with that.
If you're participating virtually and you'd like to make a public comment, you can raise your hand, let the chair know you're interested in speaking. Don't see anybody on a phone.
Any hands up?
Yeah.
Another 30 seconds. Start the machinery.
I think we have a public comment.
Oh. Mr. Gross. Sorry.
Very briefly. I didn't want to participate in the discussion about the Gulf pit, but when we had that meeting, I wanted Selectman Bailey to know that the developer proposed a parking area for 2 or 3 cars, and I upsold them to 5 or 6. I hope you're proud of me.
I am very well.
It's true. I can attest.
I'll send you a Valentine's card. That's good. No, the reason is that we have all this wonderful property. We have some of the younger parents that bring their kids with them, but they have no place to park close to. Sometimes I see them out there walking the kids down it, and they're so excited to get there. Sometimes they, as we say, break free. And, I just worry about them on the roads. That's why I keep pushing for the parking areas or what have you. Thank you.
You know,
I hope you do the same.
Well, you know, if you read Edward Appy's talks about parks without handrails, I think sometimes it's best to leave property just completely untouched.
Yeah. But
Anyway,
we have some nice, beautiful trails. I mean,
no trails, no nothing.
you know, some of the people nowadays that are on it, they gotta be careful how I say this, no longer participate on walking the trails. They did a good job of getting, that's it. Thank you.
Any further public comments?
I haven't seen anything.
Okay. In that case, we'll close the public comment. We need to have a non-public session. Does anyone
I do not.
here? Right. There are upcoming meetings on the 17th of October. Vision special town meeting vote on the 18th. Here at the town hall, 8 to 7 on the 18th. And there's meetings, upcoming meetings, it's likely 17 and 24 October, 7 November and 14 November. I would certainly entertain an amendment, yes.
One question.
Yes,
On the voting, is the moderator going to put that together as far as who's working what, or do we have to work it?
we need to have a select board.
So we're going to talk about that at all.
Well, I'm gonna send out a request for
All right,
some schedules. and we can discuss.
so I go to the eye doctor tomorrow, I gotta wait to see where I go.
Understand.
Okay. Thank you.
Fine. Okay. Anybody like to make it? Motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
I second it.
We do have a first and second. Okay, all those in favor?
All right.
Opposed? Thank you.